pray for the people in Russia as well as the people in Ukraine. There is a big anti-war effort going on in Russia, and it is getting ugly. You can see the things that have been leaked out on the internet on the number of arrests that are happening now from people. If you disagree with the war, you can't say anything. And they will pick you up. That woman that was on television, the national broadcast for the evening news in Russia, the Russian anchor was giving the news, and this other newswoman walked behind her with a sign that said, "Stop listening to the lies. They're lying to you. No war with Russia." And she can't be found today. So pray for those who are standing up and speaking the truth, because I think that will be a lot of people all around the world.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
This is going to show my cowardice of life a little bit here.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Is what she did, was that a good decision?
Yeah, I think it was.
I think I'm supposed to say that it was. And I when I watch it, I say, you know what? That's really brave and a good decision. However, when I think about it, it's like pragmatically for a moment, maybe 1 million people in Russia saw that. It's probably a high number. I don't know. 1 million people saw it. How many minds did she change? I don't know. Maybe a few, right? A few thousand, maybe?
I don't think about changing minds. I think about giving people the feeling, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And there are people in very high places that know.
Okay.
Can you imagine if that happened on ABC News when they were talking about the Great Reset, and somebody that worked in the newsroom walked behind and said, "Don't listen to them about COVID. Don't listen to them. They're lying to you." That would make a huge impact, at least at the very least on the psyche.
It would make you, if you believed in it already, it would make you feel good about it, I think. It might change a few minds too, like maybe have a few people looking into something. There was a story, I think it was the New York Times, one of the mainstream sources, talked about a father-son duo, one father living in Russia, son living in Ukraine. And the son, the war starts, and he's like, "Hey, hadn't heard from my dad. Like, I'm getting bombs are falling all around me, and my dad hasn't even called me to see if I'm okay." So he calls his dad. Is like, "Hey, you know what's going on here? I'm in Ukraine. Like, bombs are falling." It's like, no, that's not happening. His dad in Russia didn't believe his own son, believed the state media, who was telling him that's not happening. They're just going to denazify the region. So it's pretty powerful, and maybe it did change some minds. But on the other hand, she also gave up, or she really sacrificed probably her life. I mean, let's be honest about it. If whatever life she might have ahead of her is either close to destroyed or destroyed.
So this is one reason why I want you to start thinking differently about the world. Let me give you an example. A month ago, it was insane to think about that we were going to actually think that maybe somebody would drop a nuke anywhere in the world, right? That's nuts. We all know that's nuts. But you have to know who you're playing against. And right now, the world is a little nuts. Let me take you back to October 1969. 6 American B-52 bombers, each loaded with a nuclear bomb, flew over Alaska toward the Russian border. Most people don't know this. President Nixon ordered the mission. He had been in office less than 9 months, 7 years after barely avoiding a nuclear war with a Cuban missile crisis. He decides to order missiles on B-52s to start flying towards Moscow. So we didn't start the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this one we did. So remember, Nixon was the vice president under Eisenhower, and the Cold War was at full tilt in the 1950s. And we kept each other in check by what was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. You could destroy each other, so why would anybody do it? However, all of this theory depended on a country's ability to strike back within minutes of being fired upon. Otherwise, your missiles would be crippled and you couldn't retaliate. That's where the nuclear football comes in. It's the black satchel carried by the military aide wherever the president goes. And it has the launch options, the codes, communication, so we can have a nuclear response instantaneously. Well, one of the reasons Nixon won in 1968 is because he said, I'm going to end the Vietnam War. But after he took office, negotiations with the communist North Vietnamese stalled, and he needed something that would start the peace talks again. So Henry Kissinger and President Nixon hatched an idea, very risky plan. They would make the Soviet Union think that Nixon was on the verge of using nuclear weapons to end the war in Vietnam. And that, hopefully, would cause the Soviets to say, North Vietnam, you got to go back to the table. Nixon told his chief of staff, quote, I want the North Vietnamese to believe that I've reached the point that I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word to them that, for God's sake, you know Nixon is obsessed about communism. We can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has his hand on the nuclear button, end quote. So during the last 2 weeks of 1969, the U.S. Air Force and Navy mobilized nuclear-armed planes and submarines around the world. They wanted enough activity to make the Soviets notice, but not enough to spark a crisis. The nuclear angle made everything really kind of tricky. So after a few days of U.S. readiness exercises, the Soviet ambassador requested a meeting with President Nixon, and Nixon put on his best poker face, and he told the ambassador that he was serious about this. The ambassador reported back to the Kremlin that the Vietnamese crisis was, quote, taking such an emotional coloration that Nixon is unable to control himself, end quote. So you've got planes with nukes flying towards Russia. The ambassador tells the Russians, the Soviets don't pressure the Vietnamese. He raised the stakes, ordered nuclear-armed flights, 6 B-52 bombers over Alaska. They reported the flights for 3 days. On the third day of flyovers, the Soviet ambassador sent an urgent message to Moscow saying he wasn't so sure that Nixon wouldn't pull the trigger. But the Russians thought differently. They thought, he's not going to do it. This is a bluff. He won't do it. Nixon was looking at this as a winnable bluff, a winnable chess match. But there's a couple of things to look at here and learn from history. We said we were going to send planes to Poland. Then, for some strange reason, we said no. Every time we say there's a red line in the sand and we don't do it, they learn something about us. But there's something else that we should learn from. There is zero margin of error when it comes to nuclear weapons. In the last few days of the Nixon presidency, he was depressed and he was drunk a lot of the time. And there was concern at the time that his irrational thinking at the time, he might just do a nuclear launch. Does anybody have the same concerns about Putin if the Ukrainian war drags on? Does anybody have that? Nixon's defense secretary said if Nixon gave any nuclear launch order, military commanders had to check with the defense secretary or Kissinger before proceeding. You heard that one before? The defense secretary wasn't actually allowed to change the protocol like that, but the Nixon White House never had many qualms about bending the rules, especially on this one. It was the morning of August 9th, 1974. Nixon signed his one-sentence regulation order. In last time on president for another 2 hours. But the nuclear football remained at the White House.